Hello, and welcome to part 12 in the tutorial series I'm doing on programming the Kurzweil PC3. Today I want to talk about the sample editor page. So I'm going to hit edit, go to the AMP page here, turn down the velocity tracking. Okay, we've got good levels. Let's go to the key map page here, going to hit edit. I'm going to pick the sample root assigned to C7 and put it across the whole keyboard, so that goes 0 there and all the way up to the end of the keyboard. Okay. Now I'm going to hit edit again. This takes me into the sample editor. Alright, let's start out on the trim page. The trim page allows you to view your sample and to adjust 4 important points that are used in playing back your sample. Those points are the start point, the alternate start point, the loop point, and the end point. Generally speaking, a sample plays from the start all the way to the end, jumps back to the loop point, and will loop between the loop and the end point. Okay, until the sound decays to silence, depending on how you have your sample set up. The alt start point is used on the key map page. So instead of starting at the start point, your sample will start playing back at the alt start point. And the same thing will happen. It'll play alt start to the end, to loop to the end, and it'll keep looping. Okay, so these buttons down here are used in working with samples and being able to visualize what you're doing. So for instance, let's go ahead and hit Zoom Plus a couple of times here. What Zoom Plus does is it zooms relative to the x-axis. So if you see this zoom ratio up here, what that means is 1 pixel per 1 sample. So each of these individual dots corresponds to an individual sample for this particular waveform. So if we zoom out, okay, that's 1 pixel represents 4, 16, 64, 256, and so on. Okay, so let's zoom in again, and let's hit the Gain Plus button. So what the Gain Plus does is this zooms relative to the y-axis. Okay, so if you want to see in greater detail how high your samples are, for instance, you can use the Gain Plus and Gain Minus buttons to zoom that way. Okay, so let's go ahead then and go to the next page here where we have 0 plus and 0 minus. What these do is these allow you to jump forward or backwards in your waveform and find what are called zero crossings. Okay, zero crossings are where the waveform crosses the x-axis, and they can be useful when you're trying to set loop points depending on how your sample is constructed. This particular sample, okay, let's go ahead and zoom out here and Gain Minus a bit, zoom. Okay, let's come in just a little bit. Whoops, excuse me. That's the wrong way. Okay, here we are. This particular sample has a loop point set when the volume in the sample is particularly high. That's because at the end point, the volume is also high. So it's done this way so that as the sample loops, you don't hear any clicking or any weirdness at the end of the sample. Okay, so let's go ahead now and jump back out here to this page and go over the parameters on this page. This is the miscellaneous page. This is the root key, okay, and this will determine how the sample gets pitched across the keyboard. Okay, so the root key, or the key where no transposition is applied, is A6, okay, and the PC3 will transpose down by playing the sample back at a lower sample rate. So when I play C4, it's playing it back at a very low sample rate. And if I play higher up on the keyboard, it'll play the note higher by increasing the sample rate. So the sample rate for this sample, which you can't edit, by the way, is 38,400 hertz. Okay, so the PC3 can go up as high as 96 kilohertz when playing back a sample. Okay, and this is 38.4 kilohertz. So this sample can be shifted up something like about 2.5 octaves before you hit the limit of how far up the PC3 can transpose the sample. Okay, so pitch adjust allows you to adjust the pitch without shifting the root key around, and it has quite a wide range. Let's just pick a big number here, 9,686 cents. Okay, so that's well over 9 octaves. Volume adjust allows you to adjust the volume of the sample. Alt volume adjust allows you to adjust the volume at the alt start point. Okay, so if I zoom out here and go back to my alt start point, that's where that will be applied. Okay, so only when the sample is playing from the alt start point that will adjust the volume right at that spot. Okay, the decay rate determines how fast the sample decays to silence, and the release rate determines how fast the sample or how fast the sound decays to silence after you release a key. The parameters over here on the right side of the page have more to do with how the sample is actually played back. Okay, so loop switch determines whether or not we loop between the loop point and the end point, or the loop point and start point, as you'll see in just a second here. Okay, so with it on, it'll loop between the loop point and the end point. With off, okay, when you hit a key, once it gets to the end of the sample, it'll just stop. You can't really hear that on the phone here, but when it gets to the end of that sample, it just stops instead of going into its loop phase. Okay, so the playback is the direction that it plays back in. This is normal. This is reverse. Let's turn this down. Okay, so when it's playing in reverse, I just want to show you this real quick. When a sample plays in reverse, it'll play from the end point to the start point. Then it'll jump back to the loop point if looping is turned on and play back to the start point. Okay, and it'll loop like that until forever. Actually, this decay rate does not apply when the sample is playing in reverse. It does apply, however, if you're playing bidirectionally. Okay, so you're not really going to hear it right now because of the sample envelope, but when you use bidirectional on the key map page, it does basically the same thing. Okay, so let's go down here to alt sense. Alt sense determines when you're going to jump to that alternate starting point. Okay, so if alt sense is normal, then a value of 0 means we play at the start of the sample, and a value of 128 means that we jump all the way to the alt start point. Okay, so let's put this to reverse. What that means now is a value of 0 means that I start at my alt start point instead of starting at the beginning of the sample. Let me just, so there's normal, there's reverse. So what's happening is, with reverse, I'm starting from here in the sample. With normal, I'm starting from here. Now, that obviously will can be controlled by the alt start parameter on the key map page. So you can bake into the key map that some samples start at the start point and some start at their alt start point by default. And then if I assign, say, the mod wheel to the alt start parameter and I flip it up, what that will do is, in this case, that'll cause the sample to play back from the start point instead of from the alt start point. Okay, so ignore release. This means that we're going to forget about this release rate here, okay, and just release according to the natural value that's baked into the sample. Okay. Now there's a fair amount of envelope data that you can't edit about a sample on the PC3. Excuse me. And so that's why, for instance, when I set this to bidirectional, okay, you don't hear it necessarily go play forwards and backwards and forwards and backwards because we're still under the constraints of the natural envelope. Okay, we can adjust the decay rate and release rate of that envelope, but there are other things in that envelope that we can't adjust. Okay, so if I turn ignore release off, okay, the sample plays back very staccato. And that's because the release rate here is set to 200 decibels per second. If I set it to something like 1 decibel per second, well, let's set it to like 2 decibels per second. Okay, it's going to have a very, very long release. One thing I want to warn you about is be very careful in here when you come in to edit a sample that you don't do something like this. If I do this and hit a key, that note is just going to stay sounding forever. Okay, basically until I go and I have to go back out and change the amp envelope and do some other things in order to get it to turn off. So just be aware that that can happen. These values, when you say 0, you really mean 0. So the PC3 doesn't hold your hand in that respect. Okay, I believe that covers everything that's on the sample editing page. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for the next video, which will cover, or begin to cover, the subject of wave sequencing. I will see you then. Thanks for watching.